Welcome everybody to this second research seminar organised by the Department of English and Communication at PolyU. Today we are thrilled and honoured to be graced with the presence of Dr. Tammy Gregersen, who I've known for quite some time. I met her at the World Congress for Psychology for Language Learning in, I think it was 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And as usual, her energy and charm are remarkable, and I'm sure that today will be the same. She will excite us all with amazing ideas that come from positive psychology, happy vibes, happy thoughts for language teachers and learners. So Tammy has recently published the Oxford University Press book on teacher well-being, and she continues to work in that particular area with Sarah Mercer, amongst other people. And over to you, Tammy, to get into self-care.
Great. Hi, everybody. You know, I just wanted to say that I know that I've got teachers and who are in service, as well as emergent teachers. And I have to say that this is just one of my favorite things to do in the whole world, is just to talk to teachers. And at this crazy time of this, this chaotic time that we're living in, I just want to give a huge shout out to all the teachers out there who have been frontline workers for the last 2 years and have been keeping up and just working with the mental, psychological, emotional well-being of their learners while they're trying to teach language and develop linguistic proficiency and all of that good academic stuff. So I just want to say that there's nothing better for me or nothing makes me more proud than to call myself a teacher. And that is what I am. I am a teacher just like you. And although right now I am a teacher educator, I take the most pride in being able to say that I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher, I touch the future, right? So I'm going to be talking today about self-care. And you take a look at that word and you think self-care, selfish? No, absolutely not. Look, during this whole presentation today, I'm going to be talking about I'm going to talk to you as teachers and emergent teachers, and talking to you about what you need to do, what some ideas for you to find that work-life balance. However, I want to begin because I know that some of you are very learner-centered, and very, I need to know about how I'm going to work with my learners. And what I want to say about that is that congratulations, that's amazing. And I'm going to tell you about the research. The research says that when teachers are in a good headspace, right? When we're flourishing and we're thriving, our learners learn better. So that's the important thing to know before I start talking to teachers about your professional and personal work-life balance, is that this is also a good thing for your students. Okay, so let's start because we've got a lot to get through today. Some really, I find fascinating. We're going to look at 6 different ideas. Now, all of this is in the parameters of emotional well-being. We have physical well-being and psychological well-being and institutional well-being. We have all kinds of different kinds of well-being. But today, I want to talk about emotional well-being. Okay, that's actually one of the chapters in our book on teacher well-being. So we're going to talk about socio-emotional competence. Right? That's, one of those big issues right now in 21st century global skills. It's also a big idea in the UN sustainability goals. So it's important for us to know, as well as for our learners to know. We need to be integrating these into our lesson plans as well. So everything I go through today, I just as an aside, I'm going to be talking to you as teachers, but I've also used a lot of this in my own language classrooms and in my own teacher ed classrooms. And so some of these activities are really wonderful ways of integrating language and well-being in the language classroom. That's socio-emotional competence. Number 2, the broaden and build theory of emotion, Barbara Fredrickson. We're going to talk about the balance of positive and negative emotion and what that balance can do. We're going to talk about emotional self-regulation, that whole idea of the control that we can have of ourselves and our affect. Negativity bias. I don't care how confident you are, how much self-esteem you hold. We all, as a human characteristic, at least a little bit of time, we have a tendency towards a negativity bias. And we're going to talk about that and what we can do about that to kind of stave it off. Emotional labor. As caring professionals, we tend to have this. We're going to talk about it, doctors, teachers, nurses, social workers, any caring profession, we tend to have emotional labor. And we're going to talk about what happens when it gets adverse. And then lastly, we're going to talk about self-compassion. We're going to look at what Neff says about being our own best friend. Okay, so here we go. Ready to move on. Number one, the cornerstone of socio-emotional competence is self-awareness. Okay, now, when we talk about self-awareness, so we're gonna, when Daniel Coleman talked about emotional intelligence, and then he wrote that second book on social intelligence, both of those intelligences begin with awareness, being aware of our own emotion or of our own social capacities. So what does that awareness mean? It's three things. Awareness at three levels, okay? One, to recognize the experience of an emotion. You might say, that's kind of weird, but you know what? How often is it that we have a physiological reaction to something and we don't even give it a moment's thought, right? So for example, my heart might be racing, my palms might be sweating, but I just push forward. Now, the interesting thing is that there is an emotion there and I just haven't recognized or given it a full, my full consciousness. Number two, after we recognize that we're experiencing an emotion, the immediate, almost simultaneous idea would be to identify, name it, or label it, right? Okay, I've got this strange physiological thing going on where my heart is racing. Okay, you know what? I am excited about something. You could label it as anxious. How you label it is probably going to define much of how you're going to deal with it, right? Okay, and then lastly, being aware of its effect and function. Okay, what is the effect of this variable on me and what is its function? I've got a really funny story to tell. So Sal, my good friend, he mentioned that I was working with Peter McIntyre. Well, Peter and I did a study several years ago on language anxiety. And we wanted to take a look at triangulating our data with physiological measures. And so he had this idea of putting on the heartbeat monitors that we wear like Fitbits. And he was going to get a graph of how that kicks out later. Okay, so when we did this, I was up in Cape Breton where he lives. And so he had arranged for me to go and give a talk. So he had me strapped into this heart thing. And so I was giving my talk and I was all over the room and I was super excited. So when we got back to his office and we saw the graph, my heart rate was off the ceiling. And, we were looking at this in the context of anxiety. And I said to Peter, I said, Petey, but you know what? I wasn't anxious. And Peter said, no. He said, because you labeled that emotion as enthusiasm and you moved on with it from there. But when some other people get that racing heart and their mouth goes dry, they define it as anxiety and go on from there. So there's a lot to be said about recognizing the experience of an emotion. I'm feeling something, but then we identify, name, and label it. And in that identification, naming, and labeling, we're actually defining, how will we respond? So kind of, it does have implications. Okay, now, Milky, he was in 2019, and he was way before Demi Lovato, right? So Demi Lovato was saying it's okay to not feel okay in her song, right? But I think she was preceded by Milky, who said, don't feel bad about feeling bad. Okay, so I think that one of them was plagiarizing. So we've got to figure out who that was because I didn't see any citations in either of these. So when Milky said, don't feel bad about feeling bad, we need to be taking a look at something that's very important. The idea that negative emotion is not something that you necessarily need to eradicate. Negative emotion actually has a very important place. Let's think about this in terms of evolution, okay? In terms of evolution, when we were thinking about early times, fear. What does fear do? You come upon a bear in the woods and you feel fear. Fear does what? It makes you take action and you run. Say you feel jealousy in a relationship. What do? Well, you might want to take action about that relationship. What's going on, right? You have a feeling, and a negative feeling makes you take action. A negative feeling also does something else. It also makes you appreciate when you're in a good headspace, right? So you don't know good unless you've also experienced bad, right? Because you have no point of comparison. So all I'm saying is, and we're going to get to an idea of what this balance looks like. When we feel a negative emotion, we again, be aware of it, reflect on it, okay? Reflect on it. What's this all about? And accept it in the moment, right? So to say, I'm annoyed, this person annoys me, okay, I'm aware, okay, yeah, I'm annoyed. Okay, let's reflect on it, okay, yeah, I'm annoyed. What's going on here? Okay, I accept it in the moment, but then in accepting it, I get to process it. Is there action that I need to take over this? Okay, next. Now, Diner and his posse, they talk about well-being as life satisfaction, the presence of positive emotion, and a lack of negative emotion. Please notice very clearly that some of the top experts in positive psychology are saying that you don't eliminate negative emotion. You just try to have a balance where you have more positivity than negativity. Now we're going to get into the broaden and build theory in a minute, and Barbara Fredrickson is going to say 3 to 1. She's going to say that research suggests that a person is balanced when for every negative emotion they experience 3 positive ones, more or less. Okay, so in a nutshell, emotional well-being is not denying the negatives, but rather seeking to experience proportionally more positive. Now, this is what Barbara Fredrickson says. She calls it the broaden and build theory. She says that when we experience positive emotion, our thought action repertoires are broadened. Okay, I want you, okay, and then the opposite also happens. When we experience a negative emotion, our thought action repertoires narrow. So let's think of an example of this. What's that mean? Okay, think of the last time you were happy and you had to make a decision in that state of mind. Wasn't it true that you had a lot more options available to you when you were happy and when you were in a good place, when you were thriving? Now, think about when you had to make a decision or select an option when you were angry or sad. Notice, reflect back, how those options were much more limited. So when we feel positivity, life opens up. When we feel negativity, it kind of closes down. Okay, and that's what she calls the broaden and build theory. Now, here's the thing. There's some I'm fascinated by this research, and I just went to revisit it a couple of weeks ago because I was writing a paper where I did the citation. We can alter the amount of positivity we experience through certain actions and activities. Now, we all have a baseline of where we are, okay? But let me talk to you about that and this is where I had to go look up the numbers. Research suggests that about 50% of our happiness, depression, that scale, that temperament scale is actually a predisposition. It's inherited. We're born that way. If any of you are parents, I've got 3 kids. My first kid was born grumpy. He came out grumpy and he continues to be a grump. My 3rd child came out laughing and she continues to be just joyful. I love my grumpy kid as much as my joyful kid, but the life is a lot easier for my joyful kid than my grumpy kid. But what happens is that they were born with that. There's a baseline of behavior. Now, when we have the other 50%, which is 25 and 25, so we've got 50% that's a predisposition. There's really not much we can do about that. 25% of the remaining is our environment, what happens to us. Sometimes there's control over it and sometimes not, but there's 25% that's kind of situational, contextual. And then there's 25% concerning decisions that we can make about our own destinies, okay? So now, the question is that we have this set point, right? And the important thing to know is how far down do we move with certain things that happen to us in life and how fast can we get back? Or how far do we go up and how long can we stay up there, right? Before we come back to our baseline. So these kinds of things happen. We've got that baseline, but then there's another percentage that's acting upon that baseline that might move it up and down, okay? So now, what Luborovsky and her colleagues say is that we can consciously enhance our overall levels, right? There's a certain percentage of control that we do indeed have. And I'm going to talk to you about some of these ways. So now we're teachers, and here are some actions and activities that actually increase, and these are, I need to be very clear about this, these are empirical and they are interventions that have been studied for both their short-term and their long-term effects. So this isn't just, somebody saying, you know what, I think this might be anecdotally a very pleasing idea. No, these are actually things that people have researched and studied and can actually give you some data on what's going on here. So number one, how can we increase that level of contentment? Acts of kindness and generosity. Later, I'm going to be talking about altruism, which is essentially what we're talking about here. But when we involve ourselves in being kind and generous to other people, there's a kickback to that, right? When I did a study myself with a group of students in the United States when I was working there a couple of years ago. And this was actually with Peter as well. And okay, so these were I was working with my TESOL, my pre-service teachers, my emergent language teachers, and they were tutoring in the English Language Center of the university. And what we did was we had 6 interventions that we were going to use at the beginning of class. Well, sorry, we measured affect before we started. Then we did an intervention, and one of these was doing an act of generosity or kindness. We measured that using the same measure. It was just a very simple, on a scale from 1 to 10, how do you feel? And then we wanted to find out if there was any kind of long-term positive energy that was actually erupting from this, in this case, act of generosity and kindness. And so say, for example, what we did was the 2D, the student, the language learner, came to the class. We took the measure, and then we all took a pencil and pen and we wrote thank you notes to the janitors and we brought candy bars to the classroom. And we ran around the university putting thank you notes and chocolate bars on the carts, the cleaning carts of the janitors. And then we came back, we measured again 1 to 10, how do you feel? They gave their answers, and they were high. But then imagine that at the end of the class, we measured again and they remained high. So we were comparing the original with the middle to the end, and it was just an amazing experience of seeing these students thrive because they did something kind for someone else that came back to the classroom and they felt pretty good about themselves, okay? Spend money on experience and not things. You got an extra 25 bucks. The idea might be to invite a friend out for lunch rather than going and buy a pair of new shoes. Because why? Because researchers have discovered that the long-term effects of being able to savor that experience is going to be much longer than the happiness you get by putting on a new pair of shoes. Okay. Example of this, this weekend on Saturday is my 33rd anniversary of being married. I have a graduate assistant, research assistant who's very close to me, who I love to death. And she knows my theory of spending on experiences and not on things. And so she wanted to do something kind for us. You know what she did? She went out and bought tickets to a camel race because I She had logged it in her mind that a couple months ago I had said, I would love to see camels racing and I've never done that. And, and so she went out and bought tickets to a camel race for me. And I thought, you know what, this is why I love you so much, because she, I just thought that was kind and generous and she was spending on experience. I hope she feels the kickback that I got. Create micro moments of positivity. You know what? I think that we run through life so quickly that we forget to savor those moments of micro positivity. For example, I have one every single morning. Every single morning I get up before everybody else in the house and I put on Andrea Bocelli. And Andrea Bocelli sings a ballad just to me, only me, in the kitchen as I'm preparing my coffee. And I sit down with that hot cup of coffee and that first sip. It actually gets me out of bed in the morning because I savor that first sip, and then I don't have any more coffee throughout the day. Why? Because I want to remember how good that first cup is. And if I make it too often during the day, then it's not as special as that first cup of the morning. That's just my thing. But those are micro moments of positivity, right? We create moments that we savor. And I think that we can all find them. I feel the same way about bubble baths. Right? Okay, set aside time to watch your favorite TV show or film. Now, I want to tell you something about this. Don't use this as a form of procrastination, people. Right? Don't use this as a form of procrastination. It's two different things, right? You set aside time because you set aside time because you've been working and you deserve this moment for yourself. Okay? I got you. I know you, yeah, you're a bunch of mini me's. Also, go for a walk in a park, do yoga or aerobics. Buy yourself a dog. Don't buy. Adopt yourself a dog and take the dog for walks in parks. It'll be amazing for your well-being. Any kind of physical activity, okay? There we go. These are activities that help you increase your sense of happiness and contentment. Now, here is an activity that you can do with your learners, or you can do it for yourself. This is an activity that I want to show you. I want you to be aware of the positive things and allow you to replay those positive moments. So prepare lists using these prompts. You can actually do this in the language classroom, either as a writing activity or as a speaking activity. My fondest memories are, now what I like to do is put them on Post-it notes and post them in different places. And so just as I'm walking up, past it, I say, oh yeah, I remember that. That is so fun. Yeah, I remember that was so cool, right? Number two, the quotes that inspire me most are, oh yeah, I'm a teacher, I touch the future. I knew there was a reason I became a teacher, right? Just somewhere in the middle of the day. Yeah, I remember. Lines from my favorite poem or song. Well, I sang a little bit of, I did my interpretation of Andrea Bocelli. I need to tell all of you, you don't have to. If you really want to be moved by a song, it's called Vivere or Dare to Live. It's a bilingual song. It's in English and Italian. And it's my favorite song ever. And the lyrics are amazing. Dare to live. I highly recommend it. And you've got to hear Andrea Bocelli sing it because, yeah. Oprah Winfrey said that if God had a voice, he would sound like Andrea Bocelli. So that's pretty important stuff. Okay. My favorite film or TV show is the most beautiful thing in my home or garden is to bring your mind to a good place, right? Go to a happy spot here. The best teaching experience I have ever had. Wow, right? That one is particularly good if you have that one stuck somewhere on your desk. Okay, next. The other idea is to keep a positivity portfolio. Okay, and this is from Fredrickson, the Broaden and Build lady. Now you can do it in a physical space like a box. That's what I have. Or you can do it in a digital place. I mean, we tend to do that also. I mean, you can just kind of create a happy file on your computer. And there, what are you going to do? Congratulatory emails from administrators. Hey, if I've got any chairs of departments out there or people who are observing other teachers or something, where you're in an observational or administrative role, this one's for you. Send a congratulatory email to somebody so that they can put this in their positivity portfolio. Number two, thank you notes from students. So if you're a teacher, put that in your file. If you're a student, write to your teacher and tell them how much you love them. Appreciative messages from parents. If you're a K-12 teacher, these are so, so important. And then finally, other positive notes from people in your life. So what happens when that negativity, kind of swamps you and pulls you down? Reread the positive words and be reminded of the valuable role that you play for others. Because sometimes, that negativity gets to us and it's like, oh, no, nobody loves me. Everybody hates me. I think I'll go eat worms, right? So when that happens, when you get into that worm eating mode, go back to your positivity portfolio. Okay, next. Emotional self-regulation. Okay, now again, this is very similar to what we talked about at the beginning when we were talking about socio-emotional competence, because essentially that is self-regulation. I'm going to give you 5 different options of dealing with negativity. Number 1, avoid situations that elicit certain emotional responses. You know what? Avoidance as a coping strategy is not always bad. Okay? Avoidance is not always bad in order to cope. Why are you going to expose yourself to something that you know is going to make you angry or sad or frustrated when you don't have to do it? If you have to do it, then you've got to deal with the emotion. But if you don't have to do it, don't deal with the emotion. Just avoid doing it in the first place, right? I have a colleague. I love all of my colleagues, except for one. And this one colleague is so toxic that I avoid her. Even when I wasn't avoiding her, I would walk by and I would try and catch her eye to say hello, and she would pretend that she didn't even see me. I don't need that. I don't need that. So I just take a different hallway now. Number 2, modify or change the situation to make it less stressful. Okay. So say, for example, here's an idea. This is a very simple idea. I used to have a student who came in late all the time. And I asked the student to be on time and it didn't work. And so it was annoying because this person will come in through the front door of the classroom and walk right in front of me and sit down. Okay, well, it doesn't happen in every culture, but it happens in American culture. So what I decided to do was unlock the back door. And I told this person that, you know what, you can be late. I don't care. Just be late if you want, but go in the back door. No more, I'm going to lock the front door. So I changed and modified the situation of them coming in the front door and disrupting my class, and instead said, you know what, be as late as you want. It's your problem. It's your life. It's your education. But go in the back door. And so I modified the situation so that the stress wasn't on me anymore. Small things, right? Choose where to focus attention and what to concentrate on. Okay, this one is often called cognitive reappraisal. That's what the psychologists call it. Like not anecdotally, but kind of conversationally, vernacularly, we call it find a silver lining. And this is also something that I did as a study with Peter. We did an intervention with international teachers. And what we asked them to do was, for a week, every time they came up against an adverse event, we wanted them to cognitively reappraise. What did we want them to do? We wanted them to find something good about a bad situation. So say, for example, you go to the student union or you go to the teacher's lounge, and there usually is coffee in the coffee pot. Okay, and you're between classes, and so you were thinking you're going to go get that coffee. And so you run there, you go, and the coffee pot's empty. And so you have 2 choices. One, you can be annoyed and say, I wanted that cup of coffee, and you go back to your classroom annoyed. Or you could cognitively reappraise it. And you could say, you know what, I wanted to cut back on my caffeine intake anyway, so it's a good thing there wasn't any coffee. Today's my day. Today's the day I'm going to start. Okay. So then you go back to your classroom saying, hey, you know what? New day for me. Okay. So that is cognitive reappraisal. So what happened with this group of teachers? We asked them to cognitively reappraise, tell somebody in the moment that they're doing that, and then quickly write it down as soon as they had a free moment about what situation was adverse, how they cognitively appraised, and how they felt about it. That was to solidify the whole idea of the contentment that comes from cognitive reappraisal. So at the end of the study, we realized that for some people, this was a fantastic idea. It was something that worked very well. It came very easily. It came easily to some people. I cognitively reappraise all the time without knowing that I do that, and it drives some people crazy. Other people have a harder time with it, but they can still do it, and they have a point of advantage with it. However, there are other people who already have strategies that are in their lives, like defensive pessimism. I remember one of the teachers in our study, the cognitive reappraisal, the silver linings, had a short-term effect, but the longer-term effects came from her defensive pessimism. And what was that strategy? That strategy was to set low expectations so that if the expectation isn't met, you plan for that anyway. And if your expectations were exceeded, then woohoo, party time. I got more than I expected, right? That's cognitive reappraisal. The other one, or that's also cognitive, that's not cognitive reappraisal. That is defensive pessimism. Both strategies for adverse events. Now, the problem with silver linings is that silver linings are really only beneficial when you don't have control over the situation. Because what happens? Okay, so say for example, it rains to the point of flooding and my car gets flooded. I could say, well, you know what? I get the insurance money, I get a new car. Woohoo! I get a silver lining, right? However, if I try to invoke a silver lining when I have control over the situation and I should be taking action on it, then I don't want to be cognitively reappraising. So say, for example, I am late to my class every day. I could cognitively reappraise and say, ooh, I had more time to spend preparing. I could have done that, but that's not a good thing, right? I should be on time, right? So you shouldn't cognitively reappraise when action needs to be taken, okay? So we choose to focus attention and what to concentrate on. That's part of self-regulation. Change the way you think about a situation is another one I just mentioned. And then decide how to handle our emotional response afterwards. After you've had the emotion, after you've thought about it, you have a choice. How do I respond to that experience of emotion? And how do I want to move forward after that? So we talked about it. Do we avoid the situation later? Do we change or modify the situation, right? So we can decide how to handle our emotional response after the fact. Here we go, onward, forward. Negativity bias. This is very human. Here's what we tend to do. When we have negativity bias, it's this tendency that we have to think about the negative rather than the positive. So for example, I have 25 students in my class. Every semester that I've been teaching in the United States and here in Sharjah, my students have the opportunity at the end of every semester to evaluate my teaching. And so I get the responses, I get their feedback, and it's anonymous. And say, for example, I'm just giving you as an example, 24 of my students put that I was exceptional, okay? But one student said I was mediocre. Okay, so what do? Do you think that I went home celebrating the 24 who said I was exceptional? No. I went home thinking, oh, that one person thought I was mediocre. There's nothing worse than being mediocre, right? That's the negativity bias. We have all of these reasons to be positive, but where do we focus our attention? On that one thing that really was kind of sad, that was frustrating, right? So what is this? This is actually the human response of typically remembering and being more affected by adverse events than neutral or positive ones, okay? That's what negativity bias is. So what can we do about it, okay? This is how we do it. This is also an activity. So when you feel that there's that negativity bias, when you're falling into the trap of thinking about the negative instead of the positive, you can ask yourself these questions. So let's go through with the example that I gave. What unreasonable belief do I want to dispute and conquer? Okay, well, I want to dispute and conquer the idea that I'm mediocre. Okay, can I reasonably defend this belief? Can I defend the belief that I'm mediocre? Well, the student did, because the student wasn't happy with me because I, according to the student, gave too wide of parameters. I'm a teacher who loves to give students choices. And I want them to be able to use a lot of autonomy in their own learning. And so I don't set really rigid parameters. And this learner was a learner who really wanted very precise instructions on what they needed to do. But because that's not the way I teach, that student suffered. Okay, so can I reasonably defend this belief? Well, you know what? I can defend it from the position of that learner, sure. What proof exists to support the veracity of this belief? Well, that student was uncomfortable, okay, but that was one, right? What proof exists that suggests that this belief is flawed thinking? Well, 24 other students said that they thought I was exceptional. Okay, good. What would be the worst outcome if this belief became reality? What, that I'm mediocre? What would the worst outcome be? Well, I don't think I would lose my job, but well, I might be talked to. What positive action could I take if this belief became reality? Well, I might think about what action could I take? I might think about working with students who need more instruction, who need more precise instruction. I could think about maybe adapting my instructions to be able to be more explicit with those learners who need that. Okay, well, that's a good action. That's something good. Now, what would be a more rational way of viewing this belief? Well, that probably I'm a pretty good teacher, but there are some things that I could do to make it better. But you know what? Overall, I'm probably better than mediocre, right? And so there's this way of challenging, right? So it's not something that we just throw the negative away. It's that we actually think through it, and how realistic is this? And is there action I can take? So I don't want anybody to think that positive psychology is happyology, right? There are adverse events that take place in people's lives. There are negative emotions, but what we have to do is learn from them and move on, right? Now, what is emotional labor? Emotional labor is when we suppress a certain emotion and instead we perform something. We perform that's in line with what people's expectations of us are, okay? So as teachers, for example, it's expected that we do not show anger, frustration, or disappointment in the classroom, right? We just don't do that. So now, why is emotional labor a bigger thing for teachers and doctors and nurses? It's because we're a caring profession, right? And I would hope that we enjoy caring for our learners, right? It's part of who we are. It's part of, I think, for most of us who chose teaching, it's part of why we chose teaching, because we wanted to have more meaning and purpose in our lives, right? So when we care about other people, it's positive and rewarding, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. So the idea that emotional labor is part of the job, we got to accept that. It's part of who we are. We care about our learners, so we live up to the professional expectations of our profession, which means we don't show a lot of adverse emotion when we're in the classroom. So when does this become harmful? Okay. When we suppress our authentic emotions and we experience dissonance between what we really feel and what we believe we're permitted to or should display emotionally. Now, I know also that certain cultures are given to more display rules in terms of the expression of emotion than others. I think that US teachers are probably allowed to be more expressive than, say, for example, people in Eastern Europe, teachers in Eastern Europe, or some cultures in Asia, right? It's just, there's not that liberty to express, right? So now emotional labor is going to be even more affecting because we're suppressing even more in those cultures where that's not supposed to, or that's not supposed to occur. So what happens when we get this stressful, when we get this emotional labor? We feel stress, and we create, we sum that up with discomfort. But what that ultimately happens is that we have a health adversity, right? And over time, it just keeps swelling. And what happens is get burnout, right? That's why teaching and caring professions, that's one of the reasons why burnout is so high in our profession, is because there's this emotional suppression that we have, and we're not allowed to display all of those adverse effects. So what do we do? How to deal with stressful emotional labor. Number one, we need to distinguish and label it. We're, again, guys, you know what? We're talking about being aware of it and giving it a name. Okay. And then what do? We observe and we liberate it. We see it, but we have to let it go. You see, we recognize it. When we suppress it, we have to recognize it as a suppression of emotion. And then when we recognize it, we can just say, okay, I've got to just let this go. Now, what happens then is that you have the ability to, when you let it go, you can actually forecast and recognize it in the future. You can actually say, you know what, I have this tendency of having a pattern, which is number 4. You can forecast the patterns that are going to exist, right? And you can do things that help you in that moment when you're distinguishing and labeling. You know, this brings me to another thing that I just want to take 2 or 3 minutes to do. And I didn't put it in this slide, but there have been 3 or 4 times throughout this webinar that I've been talking about naming emotion. And I just finished submitting a paper with a graduate student of mine. Her name is Amini, and we together put in this paper, and it was so cool, because what we did was we had language teachers in the classroom. Whenever they were interacting with a student in the classroom, we asked them, before they respond to the student, to actually stop, look at the face of the student, and then, and only then, name the emotion that the other student is thinking in their minds, and then respond. But they were only to respond after they've looked at the face of the student and understood the emotion that was propelling them to move. So say, for example, there was one instance with Paul, he was the teacher, and there was a student who came up to him and asked about the grades on the quizzes from the day before. Well, Paul's initial response was to get annoyed, because he was kind of, he immediately thought, the student is judging me because he's only given me 1 day to grade these things. I do have a life outside, right? So why is he asking me the day after I just gave the quiz? So he saw it as a judgment. His immediate response was to get annoyed. But then he looked at the face of the student, and he saw a look of worry in the face of the student, which completely changed his level of empathy, because he looked not at himself, but he looked at the other, at his learner, and he said, he's feeling worry, not judgment. And so it completely changed his interaction with the student, because he was more in tune with the emotion of the person that he was interacting with. And for Paul, that moment was like a light switch going off. Being able to label our own emotion and label the emotion of the people we're interacting with is huge. Okay, just thought I'd throw that in. Now, self-compassion. So Neff is saying this, and this is a direct quote from her. We need to treat ourselves with the same kindness, caring, and compassion we would show to a good friend or even a stranger, for that matter. All Neff is saying to us in self-compassion is just act towards yourself as you would if you were the best friend of somebody, as if you were the best friend of yourself. So what does that mean? Say the same thing that you're getting angry or annoyed with yourself about. What happens if that was your best friend instead of yourself? How would you respond? Well, you'd probably be kinder, right? Because if it was your best friend who just didn't have time to grade the papers, instead of getting mad, you're going to be kind to that person, right? Same with you. How about ceasing the label of good or bad, right? When it's us, when you're self-judging, we say, oh, that was good or that was bad. But you know what? When it's your best friend, you don't say, well, that was bad, right? You cease those labels of good and bad. Accepting of the person that we are. Okay, we can accept the person we are and still know that we have somewhere to go. And that's what we do to friends, right? Be tolerant of our humanness. When it's our friend, we are. When it's ourselves, I'm not so sure. Not all of us. And then be accepting of our imperfections. Now, some of us don't need to be more self-compassionate. Some of us might be overly self-compassionate. So you know what? All I'm saying is if the shoe fits, wear it. If the shoe doesn't fit, guys, then you're like Cinderella's sisters, the ugly stepsisters whose foot didn't fit in the shoe. Okay, now here's the activity for this. When you are yourself a person that doesn't show compassion to yourself, or when you have learners who are not capable of self-compassion, this is an activity. Write down anything that caused you negative emotion or which you judged yourself about in terms of your reaction. Okay, write that down. Now, consider how you would respond to that experience that you wrote down if you were the most generous and kindest friend. I'm considering that. I'm pondering that. I'm reflecting upon that. Now, write that response to yourself and show yourself compassion. Again, it's one of these things where if you need it, you use it. If you don't, then you don't need more self-compassion. Here we go. I mentioned this earlier. It's called performing acts of altruism. What is altruism? It's behavior that's driven by the unselfish aim of serving others, right? That's our motive. Our motive is to serve others. It's not to get the helper's high, even though that's a kickback. When do we behave altruistically? When we observe others in troubled conditions and we feel empathy. Now, although it's not the reason we do it, we behave compassionately towards others. When we behave compassionately, it actually triggers a dopamine response. And it's actually a feel-good response. It's a physiological response when we're kind to others. It's called a helper's high. It's true, it's for real. They actually did brain imaging when people were doing acts of kindness to each other. And there was a dopamine release and people felt good about doing good, okay? Now, altruistic, other regarding emotions and behaviors are associated with greater well-being, health, and longevity. You're gonna live longer. You'll live longer if you're nice to people. We talked about that as a way of raising your happiness. So it leads to greater well-being. You're nice to people, you have better health. Live longer. So everybody, take joy in pandemic teaching. Woohoo!